Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Next Lawyer Up podcast. Today we're going to be talking to Brad Botus, and I'll get to that in a minute. But before we do, the podcast, the Next Lawyer Up podcast, is sponsored by our law firm, bondandbotus.com. At the web, that's BONDANDBOTES.com. And again, we'll be talking to the Botus of bondandbotus.com. Our offices are located in Alabama, Tennessee, and Mississippi. Poke around our website. There's a lot of good information there. So Brad Botus, great guy, great friend, long-term friend of mine, like me, from Chicago. And in fact, that's how I got to know him. And when I say Chicago, mostly the suburbs, a little bit of city living. But Brad is a great guy, a guy with the capacity for an unbelievable amount of work. And I mean that from, legal work to his nonprofit charitable work that he does. He wears a Fitbit, and I'm sure a lot of folks do. I do as well. If maybe on great days I'll get to 15,000 steps. This guy pretty consistently is at 25,000, which is stunning and almost unbelievable, and that's something we'll get into. So without further ado, here's Brad. All right, welcome, Brad.
Thank you, Ron. Looking forward to this.
Now we are talking the day after the Cubs are going to the series.
Yeah, something you and I have both waited for all our lives.
Amazing.
Growing up in Chicago, it's been tough, and it's just hard to comprehend. My dad was 18 years old the last time the Cubs went to a World Series, and of course, at age 18, 1945, he was overseas and in the Navy, so he didn't even get a chance to see that World Series.
Well, it's emotional, right?
I have to acknowledge there were a couple of tears in my eyes last night that my wife Kay will vouch for.
Tears in his eyes.
It was
Cinderella story.
It's just, and I don't think if you haven't lived in Chicago and haven't gone through this, it's just hard to comprehend. You and I both remember the Chicago columnist Mike Royko that wrote for years, and he wrote once that any dad that raised his son to be a Cubs fan should be arrested for child abuse, and it's
No, Royko was a Sox fan, right?
Now I remember him being a Cubs fan. Now I may be wrong,
or maybe neutral to Cubs.
Yeah, I think he picked on everybody a little bit.
Well, growing up in Chicago, of course, you're North Side or South Side, right? And no one, if you like the Cubs, you hate the Sox.
That's it. And people in Alabama might relate to the Alabama-Auburn thing. But, of course, when we grew up, the Cubs and the White Sox didn't play each other. There was they traditionally played a preseason type game, but it was a rivalry. And you made reference to the North Side, South Side thing. Yes, most Cubs fans are North Siders, Sox fans are South Siders. My dad grew up on the South Side, but his older brother was a Sox fan, and that wasn't going to work for him, so he became a Cubs fan at a very young age.
Right. Well, even growing up, so do you remember how much you always wanted to wear the blue Cubs hat?
Right? Absolutely.
I mean, I lived for that, but they were expensive, so I don't recall getting them that often.
Right. No, and I remember those trips to Wrigley Field. It really is. It's a magical place, and I get a kick out of taking my son's back up there today. It's like no other ballpark, and I'm sure you feel the same way.
Right. But, so growing up and then moving here, so the Cubs were the lovable losers, right? And it was in some respects here, like my kids would have rather, when I coached their Little League teams, they would rather wear Yankees uniforms or Red Sox, where Cubs, you didn't want to wear it, right? The lovable losers.
That's it. Yeah, I remember moving here, first moved here in 79, and throughout the 80s, getting along with my Atlanta Braves fans' friends was easy because the Braves were also losers, but then they went through that winning streak in the 90s, and it made it even harder.
Right. Well, so let's back up a little bit. So I was born in the city, Montrose and Mozart, North Side, maybe 2.5 miles from Wrigley. I don't know how better to describe it, by Horner Park. So where were you born?
I grew up in the western suburbs, a suburb by the name of LaGrange. My parents were both born and raised on the south side of Chicago. My mom's parents moved out to Brookfield, which is a suburb west of Chicago.
Brookfield Zoo, right?
Brookfield Zoo, many people know. They moved out in the 50s, and when my dad got out of college, my mom and dad had married before he started at the University of Illinois, and then when he finished college, they temporarily moved in with my mom's parents in Brookfield, and then they located a house in LaGrange, which is adjacent to Brookfield. They moved there in the late 50s and had that home for 40-plus years.
So you grew up in that house?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
So, as you know, of course, since I've known you for a long time, I'm from Chicago, and then my folks moved out to the suburbs, and we were in that kind of apex, Arlington Heights, Wheeling, Buffalo Grove. There's almost a corner that hits them all.
Right.
And so when I hear LaGrange, and I've told you this, I have no idea where that is, right? I think Hinsdale, I think,
Well, and again, people that haven't lived in a large metropolitan area like Chicago, my wife grew up in a town of 7,500, and she knew the communities that were within, obviously, a 25, 30-mile radius. In Chicago, there are dozens and dozens of them. And I'm like you. I knew the western suburbs well, but getting up into your neck of the woods where you grew up,
does that mean anything to you? Or how about Long Grove?
I know generally the direction, but but navigating would be tough.
Right. I feel the same way.
Yeah.
That's funny. Well, so you getting down, so you went to high school there in LaGrange, right?
That's correct. Lyons Township High School.
So again, same thing with Lyons. Like I remember when I was in high school, what are we, like a year or two apart, right?
I finished in 78.
All right. So I graduated 80. Like East Leiden. Where's
Right.
East Leiden?
Yeah, East Leiden. I want to say that is, well, as you just said.
I thought that was in your neck of the
no,
woods.
No. East
Okay.
Leiden is not near LaGrange.
And the reason
No.
I say that, so we played sports in high school,
Right.
and so Proviso West,
Proviso
they
West
were
was
basketball powerhouse,
That's
right?
correct. That's
and
correct.
who was a football powerhouse? Is it East Leiden, right?
East Leiden was a football powerhouse. Lyons Township High School's one athletic claim to fame is in 1969. They won the state championship in basketball, and remember it well. I remember 1969 as a Cubs fan for other reasons also, but that was the year that Lyons Township High School won the state championship in basketball. And again, high school sports, as you and I know, are a lot different up in the Chicago area. My high school had more students than the University of North Alabama, where I ended up going to college. They were big schools.
Right. Well, one thing I did want to talk to you about, so let's go back to the 69 Cubs. I mean, do you remember that?
Oh, absolutely. I can still name the starting lineup. Santo at third, Kessinger at short, Beckert at second,
right.
Ernie Banks at first.
No, where did Hickman play?
Hickman was center field, and Billy Williams was left field. And then right field, I want to say, was Johnny Callison, and then there was also a guy by the last name of Young that played some in right field. Of course, you had Randy Huntley catching,
right? Holtzman pitching, right?
Fergie Jenkins, Holtzman, and Leo DeRocher, who was the manager.
Right. The hard-charging Leo DeRocher.
and again, back in those days, boy, we sound like old men, don't we? But
Get
back
off
in
of
the
my
day,
lawn, you kids.
Players stayed with the same team. You didn't have free agency like you have today.
Right.
And, you learned the starting lineup, and it was going to be that way for a number of years.
Well, so I was living in the city, and I have a very vivid memory on my block, just that whole August fall. Because what were they, like 8 or 9 up?
Oh, they were.
In August?
And then you had the
And they
Miracle
went on-
Mets.
yeah, and they went on like, what, a 20-game losing streak
It was
or something.
terrible. It
But
was
I remember
terrible.
on our block, every game, you'd hear it on the radio as you're coming home from school. And it was, the men folk didn't
Right.
look too happy.
Right. And you say coming home from school. Wrigley, there were no lights, so all the games were in the afternoon.
Right.
So you're
Like
coming home from
a
school.
110 start.
Right. They'd have doubleheaders occasionally during the afternoon. So yeah, it was.
Did you ever go to a Cubs home opener?
Yes, we
So
did.
I think I went to one or two, and what a treat! I mean,
Right.
lifelong treat.
Yes,
right?
yes. And Wrigley now is a different place. It still has that nostalgia. It's still a neat place. But the rooftops across the street when we were going back in the 60s, 70s were just rooftops. There wasn't. Today you've got bleachers set, you've got stands set up over there on those rooftops, and they're all privately run. And at that point, they were just rooftops over there.
Right. All right. So let's go to, obviously we're doing this from Alabama, where we now have both lived. You longer than me, but a long time.
Right.
So let me tell you the story of, and this is to me, and it's probably a better story than what you're going to tell me, is so where you live, there was what we call COD. In my neck of the woods, we called it COD, College of DuPage.
Right.
And
right.
in that's what we called where you were at in that local area. Ours was Harper Junior College.
Right.
So you've heard of Harper.
Oh, absolutely.
So out of high school, what do? You go to COD, right?
I did. I actually finished high school a semester early. I had all of the credits I needed by the December of '77. I didn't go through graduation until.
Well, it sounds like you were at the top of your class.
And that wasn't the case. As I recall, I was encouraged to attend a couple of summer school semesters and thus had the credits.
Son, you've got to get your act together.
But I got out and wasn't sure what I wanted to do, so I found a job and signed up for some classes at the local junior college, as you say, College of DuPage. And had no real plans.
No direction.
No.
Son, what's wrong with you?
No, my older brother had taken some college, but not much. Never got a degree. He's done well, but he never got a college degree. My older sister did get a master's, but I wasn't sure if and when I wanted to go to school or what I wanted to study. So things were kind of up in the air at that point.
Do you remember this? There were a lot of, so I'm not good with my hands, as you know.
Right.
I'm no
Same here.
artisan or craftsman and or carpenter. There was this talk of tool and die, right?
Yes.
That if you didn't go to college, you go into tool and die, which I really don't even know what that is.
Well, and you probably like me, and when we were in school, we had shop class,
right.
which they don't have. I don't believe in any of the high schools anymore. But you learned how to use the various tools and basic electrical concepts and all. I didn't pick up on much of that stuff.
Fred, middle school, I remember a D, a fortunate D, a gifted D, and I thought, well, I'm not going to be a carpenter.
Right.
So, all right, so you're at COD, and this is what I tell folks: is you COD your first spring break, you make your way down to Gulf Shores. But now here's what I tell folks, and I'm going to let you finish: is that as you're driving down to Gulf Shores or Orange Beach, but I guess it was Gulf Shores, you make a detour at, exit 310, Route 157, and literally get to UNA, the Florence or Shoals area, and never leave.
Well, you're off by a little bit. When I visited Gulf Shores, actually, in 1974-75, my family took a vacation out of the blue down to Gulf Shores, and I met a girl on the beach, 15, 14 years old, and I think I was 15 and she was 14, and we exchanged addresses and became pen pals, a concept that our kids aren't familiar with.
Very quaint.
We couldn't text, we couldn't use our cell phones, so we actually wrote letters back and forth for about 4 years. So then in 1979, yes, I'm at COD. Spring break is approaching, and I'm out after classes one night with a friend that I'd met at COD, and we decided we needed to do something over spring break.
You COD guys are very wild.
That's it. And yeah, we were out drinking Cokes and eating pizza or something like that. And I said, well, listen, I know a girl in Alabama, and 4 years ago she was cute. And his response was, well, let's try that. And if that doesn't work, I know some girls in Atlanta. So we piled
you two
up.
guys together, forget about it.
Piled up in my Datsun B210. And for young people, Datsun was Nissan. Nissan Motor Company did not use they didn't call their cars Nissans in the United States. They called them Datsuns then. But we piled up in my little Datsun B210, Ron, and you'll appreciate this, with my Jensen 6x9 coaxial speakers in the back.
Boston blaring. Boston one.
I was beyond 8 tracks, but had my cassette tapes, and yes, Boston and Foreigner going wide open.
Aerosmith.
He and I drove and visited this girl in Jasper, Alabama, and we were about as out of place as can be. My hair was fairly long, wore it in an afro. I actually kept a pick in my back pocket.
Who was the Boston? Was it the Boston drummer, Sib? That's what I picture you look like. Sib with the black T-shirt and the afro.
I wasn't far off. I mean, I had on a T-shirt that said something like, and you and I could have a whole conversation about this, but I think I had a Disco Sucks T-shirt, boots and blue jeans, and got into Jasper, Alabama, and most young men our age were in button-downs or Izod cotton shirts with khaki pants and short hair, and I stood out. But kind of hit it off with this girl, and my buddy Chris met one of her friends, and we spent a couple days in Jasper, and they later talked us into trying just a semester of school at the University of North Alabama, where they were heading. And I had just broken up with a high school girlfriend, and we decided to give it a try. And I never dreamt, Ron, that I would be in Alabama for more than a semester.
That's what I tell folks. Stopped in the shoals and never left.
Right. Oh. And of course, I dated that girl for a while, but then I met my wife, Kay, at UNA, and we had a lot of great times there. It really,
and I say, lucky you.
Absolutely.
As they say, Kay's a saint.
Oh boy, how I talked her into marrying me, I don't know, but yes. And by the way, UNA. Small school, it was what I needed at that point. It gave me a chance to, my grades were better when I got there. I got involved in activities, and one of my professors encouraged me to go to law school after UNA, and really changed my life for the better.
Well, now here's the amazing part. Now, you were student body president at UNA?
I was student government president.
For a year or 2 years?
2 years.
That's pretty amazing.
Well, I just
did you cut, for God's sake, did you cut the afro?
I did, yes. I had blended in just a little bit by then.
Cut the afro to exchange the black T-shirt for a button-down? Khakis?
I have a friend to this day that still brags about the fact that he bought me my first 100% cotton shirt at about that point. But yes.
Now, what did your folks think? Your folks are still in Chicago at this point.
They were.
And you have no tie to Alabama other than you and your buddy, your drunken buddy down here.
Right. I told you we're drinking Coca-Colas, right?
Right.
But yeah, they, they weren't really sure. And again, it was I wrote back and forth to my mom some, but it was one long distance phone call a week or so, and I think they assumed I'd make my way back to Chicago after a year or two, as I did. Actually, I didn't think it would last a year or two.
You saying about the phone call, I recall. So I went to Arizona from Chicago, and just because, it was something interesting and got me out of Illinois. But yeah, I recall once a week phone call. I mean, it was pretty expensive.
Oh, and you remember the trick? It was cheaper to make a direct long distance phone call. You had a way where you could call and call collect is what we called it. You could call, and the operator would ask the recipient if they would accept a collect call. In other words, would the recipient pay for the call? And of course, I'm sure you used the same trick I did. I'd call, and the recipient, my mom or dad, would say, "Well, no, we don't accept that call," and then they'd hang up and call me back directly,
Right.
so they'd get the direct
Well,
rate.
what about this? My fraternity, a bunch of guys got access because I was in a fraternity. Arizona's kind of a national school in a sense that a lot of folks are familiar elsewhere. And guys would always get access to Watts lines.
Yes, the Watts lines. I'd forgotten that.
I was very happy when the Watts line was a free call, right? So
Right.
someone was paying for it, and I knew it wasn't me or my folks.
So many of these terms that just the Watts lines, collect calls. My mom talks about the party lines that were a little bit before us, but not too much before us. And you and I remember when somebody had a phone in their car, they were extremely wealthy.
Right,
it was
right.
usually a
And
limousine.
affluent.
Right. It was but yeah, the Watts line, I'd forgotten about that. That was a line you could
That was
use
a blessing.
and run up the long distance.
And somebody else was paying for it, and who knew who was paying?
Right. I remember you talk about that. Another thing that were popular, and they're still used to an extent, but the toll-free phone numbers. I remember my brother started his own business and established a toll-free phone number, and my mom would call him on it regularly because she said it was free. She said it didn't cost anything to call him on his toll-free number.
Right.
She didn't appreciate the fact that he was paying for all those calls.
Well, in one respect, I mean, so you have 3 kids, I have 3 kids. So just because of the expense, I mean, I wasn't, parents our generation weren't that involved in the sense that whatever you wanted to make happen, you had to make happen.
That's right. Today we're very much in tune with our kids' education and what they need to do to get ready for college.
But it's also this function of immediate contact, right? So if I want to text I texted one of my kids last night after the Cubs won. So, I mean, you're right there.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I'm same. Texted my sons after the victory last night, and
so in some respects, I don't know what's better or worse. I mean, you and I had to find our way, make our way, and if we didn't do it, no one was going to help do it.
Yeah, but I look at that and I think about how different things were and whether it's better or worse, as you ask, but it is what it is. Our kids are, and things will continue to evolve. And I think just a generation, yes, I struck out and I could only call my parents long distance once a week. My grandfather left Greece when he was a teenager and went halfway around the world knowing that he'd probably never see his parents again at that point. And long-distance phone calls weren't an option really at that point for him.
Right, that's true.
So each generation, it's just a little bit different. I feel fortunate to be able, though, to reach out and be in touch with my kids just about wherever they are.
Sure.
I'm not sure they always like it.
Right. Oh, don't kid yourself, Brad. I'm sure they love it.
Sure, yeah.
It's the old man calling to get the eye roll, the disconnects. That drives me nuts when my kids don't answer my texts.
Right.
When I see them, believe me, they're on it 24/7.
You know very well that they're looking at it and just ignoring it.
They don't want advice or critiques or suggestions, right?
Yeah, they know everything. Although it is neat, and I know you're experiencing this also with our oldest. He's at that age now where he's out of college and starting to realize again that Dad may know a few things and calls to talk things through, and that's a neat point in life when your kids get to that age.
My dad's not a complete idiot. Maybe my dad knows a thing or two.
Yeah, maybe.
That's funny. All right, so you're at UNA and things sounds like they go pretty well there.
They did. I really had a great time there. As I mentioned earlier, there was a certain political science professor at UNA. His name was Dr. Frank Maloney, and he was really a unique individual. I started off as a straight business major, and I had to take a social science elective, so I ended up in a political science course. And I remember this professor from the very beginning really making my mind work in a way it hadn't in the past. I remember he tried to involve the class in conversation. I remember clearly him just picking me and asking me a question. I don't even remember what the question was, but I know that my response made reference to somebody being in the middle class. And he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Botus, how do you define middle class?" And I said, "Well, Dr. Maloney, you're somebody that makes between, at that point, I think I said between $30,000 and $60,000 a year." And he said in front of the whole class, "So, Mr. Botus, you determine how much class a person has by how much money they make." And he said, "I know garbage men here in Florence with more class than certain attorneys in town." And it went from there, and he really made my mind work in a different way, and I ended up with a double major. I had a degree in political science. He was the student government advisor, so he encouraged me to get involved in student government, and then finally encouraged me to go to law school, which I did, and it was the right place for me to go.
Well, no, I thought the end of that was going to be, "Mr. Botus, that's how you define class? Get out of my class. Get out of my class. I don't ever want to see your face again."
Yeah, no, he
it's going to go in a horribly different direction.
He just challenged me and made me think, and all of his students, he did that, made us think and use parts of our mind we hadn't used, and it was a great point for me. In fact, I think you and I have had this conversation at some point. I think it would be neat to go back and teach a college class or two, and just work with those young heads full of mush and help them kind of shape who they are and where they want to go with their lives.
You know, whenever I talk about that to someone, I'd be a very easy grader. I'm like, "Listen, I don't really care. I mean, grades are important for you to have, so it would be an easy A from me."
I don't think I think I would be an easy grader as long as I saw the student involved and trying. I'm not so worried about the output as long as I see the effort there.
So, all right. So you go to law school at Cumberland, which is in Birmingham.
Correct. I did not apply to a large number of schools, but Cumberland admitted me. At that point, it wasn't too difficult to get into Cumberland. They also offered some scholarship money, which was, I think, as a result of some calls made by the president of the University of North Alabama at that time. It was a man by the name of Robert Galat, and he had, before coming to UNA, he had been mayor of Vestavia Hills and had some connections there at the law school. So they offered me some scholarship money.
Well, so now how are your folks feeling about this? You're now, and and I know you, I mean, you're a longtime Chicago fan on a lot of fronts, sports fan, and just the city in general. So had you thought about going back north to school, or?
I didn't for law school, although when I did get out of law school, there was still some uncertainty. I took the Alabama bar and then immediately went up and took the Illinois bar because I wasn't sure where I would live. So at that point anyway, moving back to Illinois was an option. When I married Kay, though, I knew Kay, having been raised in a small town in the South, I just didn't think she would have ever been happy in Chicago. So I think I knew when I got serious with Kay and we thought about marriage that Alabama was going to be a long-term thing. And I think my parents began to accept it at that point also.
So what do you do out of law school?
So out of law school, my first year, I was offered and accepted an opportunity to clerk with a federal district judge. The federal district judge that I clerked with, his name was Bert Haltom. He had been an attorney in Florence, Alabama, where UNA is located. And again, my connections to UNA and people I knew there helped me get that position. For non-lawyers, a federal judge clerkship is a little bit of an honor. It's a chance to kind of see the inner workings of the court, and it was a great start because, my first trip into the courtroom after my clerkship, I was a lot more at ease, I believe, than many new attorneys because I spent a year working with the judge and I saw how things went on back in chambers.
Right. It's interesting to me, a lot of judicial clerks, I mean, I'm not going to say all of them, but a lot of them can be less than kind, or they can act, they get judge-itis like they're the judge. Has that been your experience? Which it just is crazy to me.
It is. it's funny you say that, and yes, I have had that experience while in practice. I don't believe that was my attitude when I was a clerk, although the judge I worked for had some pretty stern policies, and I had to say no to a lot of requests made by attorneys and practitioners because I had instructions to do so. So I may have come off that way, but yes, you're right. A lot of clerks do go overboard with that, and I think it affects them when they get out into practice.
I imagine some law students anyway will listen to this podcast, or some, who are thinking about law school. What tips do you have? I like to ask this question. What tips do you have for law students?
I think the biggest thing for me, at Cumberland at that point, it was not easy to get into, but it was easier than some other law schools, but yet there was a very high failure rate. My class started with over 300 students and graduated less than 200. But I remember looking around at the other students, and I've always I said, good gosh, if some of these people can do it, surely I can do it.
With your COD education, right?
Yeah, and University of North Alabama. But I just knew, and when I got ready to take the bar exam, I just knew. I looked at some of the lawyers that were out practicing, and I said, surely if this man or lady was able to get through the bar exam, I'm going to be able to do it. I
can struggle through it, right?
I think it's important just to have confidence in yourself. Too many people go into law school and prepare for the bar exam, and they're very intimidated by this, hurdle that they have to get over. But I think it's just having confidence in yourself and comparing yourself within your own mind to other people around you and people that have been through what you're going through, and knowing that a lot of these people were in the same spot that you're in now. I enjoyed law school. Law school to me was a continuation of that political science class environment that I described. It was a chance to, once you got over that first semester where you had to get used to the workload and the intimidation.
But in some respects, it was easier than college. I mean, you could have a social life in law school. You could go out. I mean, you could party a little bit, just because you only had the pressure was once a year or once a semester exam.
Right. It wasn't that way for me, Ron. I did go out and socialize some, but I had socialized more in college. Of course, by the time I was in law school, I had to work. So I was working a lot of hours, and Kay and I were in a serious relationship by that point. So I didn't socialize as much as some at that point. But it is, as you say, a completely different environment because you have one exam, whereas in college you had exams through the semester.
Right.
In law school, it was that one exam at the end.
So you get out of law school, and then so you said you worked for the judge.
I did. That was a 1-year clerkship. After that, I went to work another UNA connection for an attorney by the name of Danny Evans. His wife at that point was a UNA graduate. And through some connections, got a job with him, worked with him for about 2 years. It was a general practice, did everything from wills to divorces to setting up corporations to don't tell anyone, but did a little bit of collection work at that point. We did a little bit of everything. And
now we should explain that we do the anti-collections, right?
The collection attorneys are the enemy at this point.
We never touch collections.
we don't do that, but this was almost 30 years ago now. And I knew at that point, to be honest with you, that I didn't like that end of the business, and I was not real happy practicing law at that point. The general practice, you were always having to deal with an attorney that specialized in a different area, that knew more than I did, and I just wasn't happy. And the next step, I had a good friend In fact, I like to say the way that I met Mark Bond is that I was living with his mom. And what happened is I got down to law school in Birmingham and couldn't afford an apartment. And through a mutual friend, Mark's mom, Mrs. Bond, had a home that she was it was a large home that she was planning on selling but was unable to sell, so I rented a room from her while I was in law school. And Mark, her son, was the same age and at the same track in law school, but he was at the University of Alabama. We got to be good friends at that point and afterwards, and so come 1989, he's unhappy where he is. I was unhappy, and we decided to form a firm of our own.
And it was just you two?
That's correct. Literally just us two. We didn't even have any support staff. We started in an executive suite where we shared a receptionist and shared secretarial help and had very small offices. My first desk was two-drawer filing cabinets with a door over the top of them. That was my desk. In this executive
that must have been impressive to clients. What's with this guy?
The office was so small they had to come in through the door and stand aside while I closed the door so they could make their way back around in front of the desk and sit in the client chairs.
I don't know if you watched that show Better Call Saul. At least they're not walking through a nail salon.
That's right.
To
That's
get
right.
to your office.
Now, from the outside, the building looked impressive. But once they got into my little office, I had to use my sales techniques to make them feel like I could take care of their problem.
Well, and now, so the law firm is we're in several states, right? We're Mississippi, Tennessee, and of course Alabama,
and have been in other states. We've been in North Carolina, we've been in Florida, we've been in Texas. So, yes, we grew significantly, and I attribute most of that growth to the entrepreneurial skills of Mark Bond, who is no longer active with the firm. He retired from the practice of law
in 2006, right?
Been 10 years now.
Mark is absolutely a brilliant businessman. I've never seen anything like that.
He is. He's a close friend, and his entrepreneurial skills. I'll never forget we're in that little office suite and kind of struggling and kind of doing anything that comes in the door. I had done a little bit of bankruptcy work, clerked for a U.S. trustee in law school, and then had done a little bit while I was with Danny Evans. And Mark saw how a Chapter 13 bankruptcy worked, where people had a chance to work their way out of debt rather than just liquidating their assets. And Mark, with his mind, credit cards were really just becoming popular at that point in the late 80s, early 90s. He said, if people knew how this Chapter 13 bankruptcy thing worked, it would really be helpful to a lot of folks. So he comes into my office one day and he says, I think we should do some advertising. And that just kind of rocked me, because at that point, and really to an extent to this point, some attorneys, old school attorneys, just think good lawyers don't advertise.
Right, but saying that today, right after the Cubs have won the pennant, as an aside, just to put it in context, I mean, you can't turn on the TV without seeing a lawyer advertisement. Right. In fact, we advertise comparatively very little now.
That's right. But at that point, it was a no-no. But he said, people just need to know how this Chapter 13 bankruptcy works. And you and I know now, but Chapter 13 is a type of bankruptcy where instead of liquidating your assets or just wiping out your debt, you can file a plan and work your way out of debt, protect your assets, retain some dignity. And so we started some informational advertising. This was pre-internet. So what we set up was a 24-hour recorded information line. People could call and listen about how bankruptcy worked, and we had that all hours of the night, weekends. People would call that line and learn a little bit, and then they'd call and schedule an appointment. And I became sold on advertising very quickly, because we just had client after client come in and just become very emotional, break down into tears when they realized they could stop a foreclosure and protect their home, or stop a wage garnishment, or stop a car from being repossessed. So I became a believer in advertising because I thought we provided valuable information to people that needed the information.
Right. And of course, we do some other stuff now other than just consumer bankruptcy, of course, Chapter 13 and Chapter 7. But, the thing I like about this practice is it's immediate relief for people who are suffering. And how many times it's probably once every 2 weeks I'll have someone who makes some serious, I'm not threats, but suicidal ideations, or I can see it in their face if they don't say it, right?
Right. No, it's I've said many times, I don't think there is any area of the law where you can do more good more quickly for a client than you can by filing a bankruptcy petition. And that, for people that don't know much about bankruptcy, that sounds strange, but when that bankruptcy petition is filed, the court enters an automatic stay order immediately, and that prevents any creditor from taking any action of any type against the person. They're protected. The phone calls stop. The letters stop. They're given peace of mind. Acrimony between a husband and wife because of financial problems will stop, and families will become stronger, and marriages will become stronger. And you and I have seen it multiple times over the years.
Sure, and for a lot of couples that come to me that and this is usually a discussion I'll have when I see the tension and they say, well, we want to get this fixed, our debt's fixed, and then we're going to separate or part, or we're going through a divorce. And I always tell them, 1 out of 2 will come back to me after we initially meet and kind of get things squared away, and they've reconciled.
Absolutely, and it's such a good feeling. I get more and more referrals from the pastor at my church that does marital counseling, and that would have been a no-no years ago to recommend for a pastor at a church to recommend a bankruptcy attorney, but they've learned that getting financial problems under control and dealing with them can save a marriage, can save a family, and it's you and I both know it's a great feeling to be able to get rid of stress for people.
Well, not just that, and people recover from bankruptcy very quickly. Not to give the black letter law, right? It's 6 months, and little time after discharge. The reality is, as soon as a case is discharged, it's Katie bar the door as far as credit improvement.
That's correct. And it wasn't that way when you and I first started doing this a couple of decades, longer than that, but years back.
The old man.
I tell my clients I used to spend a lot of time helping clients rebuild their credit, and now I have to issue a lot of warnings to be careful that they don't become repeat clients.
Because, they're going to get inundated with credit as soon as they get their discharge.
Exactly. Exactly. But people should also know that it's not just the discharge. Again, the day the petition is filed, the relief comes, because that protection is there immediately. And it stops the phone calls, it stops the tension, and gives people...
And I tell folks, here's free advice for creditors, right? Work with people.
Absolutely.
When they say, if I'm a creditor and Brad, you owe me $300. Well, you only can pay me $100. No, you pay me $300 or nothing. And when you ratchet that up like I'm a prisoner and you're a prison guard, that just doesn't work.
It doesn't, and that is what drives people to the bankruptcy attorney.
Take the $100.
Sure. Work with people. Be reasonable. People are good at heart. People want to pay their bills.
No, and would you agree no one wants to file bankruptcy? No one wants to be in our office.
No.
So it's not like we promote it from that vantage point.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And again, everybody has this common perception of who it is that files bankruptcy. They think deadbeat. They think somebody trying to avoid their creditors. They think somebody that's run up debt irresponsibly. And in large part, you and I know that is not the case. People come in hurting. They've done their best to deal with their finances. They've had to overcome issues with pride in order to seek help. So no, people do not want to come and see us. People do not want to file bankruptcy. But we represent good people that just need a fresh start, and we help them get it.
No, and you remember going back many years. So when I was, I'm in the Army, and I'm reading the Illinois Bar Journal, and I see an ad from this guy who apparently loves to advertise. That the ad you had that said, Alabama lawyer licensed in Illinois looking for referrals. I'm like, how unique is that? That there's someone else like me.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember getting a letter from you, and our first communications.
Well-written letter.
First, good professional letter, but our first communications. I really could use some help finding a job because I want to stay in Alabama, but I absolutely do not want to do bankruptcy work. help me find a job with a litigator.
When I talk about that, so in the Army, I probably had 25 jury trials under my belt by the time I came to you, and I loved it.
Right.
But when I look at that, how much time I put into that, and that's what you have to do with trial work, right? You have to work around and if you put in 20 hours, you probably should have put in 24.
Absolutely.
Right? And at least, that's now looking back on it. My wife Patty and I were, we were just married, no kids, but I met you just when I had my eldest son, Jack.
Right.
And I think Bradford, your eldest, was a year older.
That's correct.
And it looked like you were living. You weren't stressing like I was stressing.
No, and that's something I like about bankruptcy work, and something I disliked when I was working in the job with the attorney with Danny Evans with the general practice. When you're doing litigation work, when you're doing a variety of different things, you wake up at night worrying about things. Bankruptcy is not that type of practice. For the most part, it is a non-adversarial type practice. It was a great practice to be involved in while raising kids, right. And being a dad and being a husband. We had plenty of time, help coach our kids and be involved in their activities.
The other thing I mentioned in the introduction I have on you before you got here was, you're a guy, the amount of charitable work you do is astonishing to me.
Well, I appreciate that.
You make everyone look bad, Brad.
Well, I don't do that. It's for me.
All right, you do want to do that.
It's just for me. It's kind of the way I try to live my faith, Ron. I'm not real active with my church. I'm not. I don't wear my religion on my sleeve, but I do really feel a sense that I've got to pay back. We are really blessed to have lived the lives we've lived and to grow up where we have grown, in the United States of America with all the opportunities we've had. And you and I both know from our work that there are a lot of people hurting out there. So being involved with agencies like the Crisis Center, Big Brothers Big Sisters, some of the agencies I've had the chance to work with, it's meant a lot to me. And I will say this, it's also a good feeling. I mentioned my oldest son earlier and how he's becoming an adult and talking to me. He recently has gotten involved with the junior board of directors of the Crisis Center, where I've been active for the last 25 years. Yeah, and he's actually vice president of the junior board this year, and that's just a neat thing to see it go on to the next generation.
No, and here's the other thing I said in my introduction. So we talked about Fitbit, all right?
Yes.
So here's what my kids think about your Fitbit. That you hook your Fitbit on your dog and let your dog run around all day so that everyone sees this guy sleeps like a John Gruden schedule, right? Like maybe 3 or 4 hours a day.
They'd have to meet my 14-year-old dog now and know that the dog wouldn't do the trick. It's... as you know, I had a hip replaced about 2.5 years ago now, and after I had that done, I was worried as to what type of activities I'd be able to involve myself in, and so I just started walking, and got one of these Fitbit watches and wristbands, and it's just been both a challenge and a way for me to relax. I get out every night and I'll walk an hour and a half, 2 hours, listening to a book. It's my way of relaxing in the evening, and I've got to get my 15,000 steps in a day.
Where do you have the time? Well, and you say 15,000. I get 15,000 a number of times a week. I see yours at 20, 25,000.
15,000 is the minimum.
That's where we think the dog's coming in.
No, it's you haven't participated, but people can challenge you with the Fitbits, and you can compare steps throughout the week, and those are when I get my steps up.
When I see those challenges, I haven't never told you this, it drives me wild. I don't want to challenge. I don't want to compete. I just want to do what I do.
I have a good friend that's a physician, and he and I he'll go out walking. He'll take off on Friday afternoon, and he'll put in 30,000 plus steps on a Friday
just to beat you.
Yeah, just to beat me.
Hey, let's cancel that surgery.
Yeah.
I've got this Fitbit challenge with Mr. Bodas.
My wife Kay, when we do these, the challenge will end at midnight on Friday, and she says I'll watch my Fitbit all the way through the evening. And there are times when I have popped up at 10:30 or 11 at night to go for a walk because he's on the move.
That's funny, very funny. So. Go ahead.
But yeah, it's just been good for me. I've lost some weight. I feel better. It's the walking, and I encourage people. These Fitbits or some other type of pedometer. Get yourself on a routine. Anybody can walk.
Well, you know what, and it's obviously got the physical benefits, but mentally, it's really curative.
Absolutely,
it allows you to think through problems or thickets that you're in. And
yeah, you and I all day long are meeting with people and helping address problems, both with our clients and with people that work with us. And it's good just to spend an hour and a half on your own just walking and thinking at night.
So we've covered a lot of ground. I want to ask you one more thing. I like to ask this of folks. So if you weren't practicing law, so I know you wouldn't do tool and die.
Right.
Of that, I can assure you, I've seen your handiwork. What would you rather be doing?
Well, now that's a tough question, Ron. I think that I would want to. I alluded to teaching earlier. I like trying to impact young people, and I'd like to do this at some point still. I think teaching in a college or a law school setting would be an interesting job, just trying to help people, advance to the next step in their careers and helping them to do the best they can. I think teaching would be fun. Right.
Well, I probably don't tell you this enough, Brad, but I mean, you're a tremendous leader for all the lawyers we have, all the staff we have. I mean, you're a really tremendous leader.
Well, Ron, hearing that from someone like you really means a lot to me. We've practiced law together for a long time now. And who would have ever thought that two Chicago area boys would
two
be
idiots from Chicago, two drunken idiots, right?
That's it. Would have practiced law together in Alabama for all these years. We've watched each other's kids grow up. Even as we record this, our wives are out together and talking with one another. So it's been a great ride. I appreciate your friendship, and I think we've each been there to for the other to confide in about different things over the years, to inspire the other and to motivate the other. And I appreciate your friendship, and I appreciate just practicing with you.
Well, likewise, Brad. I feel the same way. So, well, let's close on this, and I don't want to jinx it. Go Cubs, go!
Cubs!
But let's face. Well, I'm going to say it. I don't see how they lose at this juncture. Fair?
Well, Ron,
I know.
It is hard to be optimistic and be a Cubs fan. Even last night, as late as the eighth inning, with the Cubs
a comeback wouldn't have surprised.
There was, and you were watching the game. There was one point about mid-game where there was a fly ball that just went out of bounds in the on the left field stands, and it was right about where that famous play with Mr. Bartman took place a few years back. And I think everybody that's ever rooted for the Cubs was, guys, just keep your hands in your seats, don't
Here
reach
we go.
out.
So very funny.
But yes, go Cubs.
All right, Brad. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So that was Brad Bodas, and as I said at the beginning, Brad is just as good as they come. Just not a better guy, better friend. So I'm really fortunate he's in my world. So that's about it. Appreciate everyone listening. And again, we're sponsored by bondandbodas.com. And also, selfishly, you can look at securityclearancedefenselawyer.com. So our firm, as Brad mentioned, we do bankruptcy, we do some other stuff, debt relief stuff, collection defense, lawsuit defense, Social Security, VA disability, security clearance issues, just a lot of stuff. Look at our website before you ever talk to us. Look at our blogs, look at our practice areas. We tell folks, read up on the stuff that's out there. Do that before you talk to us or any lawyer. Just know what kind of the issues are before you meet with a lawyer. We know some of this stuff can be pretty intimidating and pretty scary, but we're here to help. So, again, thanks for listening. Have a good day.